Okay, welcome to this latest video in which we preview the upcoming WWEM 2022 event, which takes place live in Telford on October the 12th and the 13th, so that's not long now. At the event, part of the a series of presentations, and there are lots, will focus on analytical chemistry and laboratory testing and monitoring activities. And so to that end, I'm delighted to have with me today Gary Fones, who's Professor of Environmental Aquatic Chemistry at the University of Portsmouth. And Gary has been heavily involved in putting the sessions together. So thank you so much for joining me today, Gary. Now, I understand that the first few sessions will be talking about PFAS. Now, I've watched the Dark Waters film. My wife has fallen in love with Mark Ruffalo, so I know a bit about PFAS, but perhaps you could explain to people why it seems to be in the news all the time these days.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Graham. So PFAS, so these are these per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. So they're quite a diverse group, but there are thousands of chemicals. There's about more than 4,700 different types of PFAS. People have used them for various different reasons, but the key concern now is the fact that they're being seen as this thing that people call forever chemicals. So they're kind of ubiquitous in the environment. They start to appear everywhere, very difficult to remediate, which is another whole topic on its own. And so what we've done is we've just tried to get a few speakers together who are investigating PFAS. So not necessarily in terms of the analytical side, but more in terms of things in terms of chemical regulation, in terms of how that interacts in terms of the industry. And then we've got a talk in terms of the monitoring side. So what are people actually doing? So, do we need to monitor for all 4,700 PFAS compounds? Are there particular ones, particular groups that we need to monitor for? So it's a very hot topic. We had 3 different speakers covering PFAS at the last WWEM meeting, the one that we had, which was all online rather than face to face, which is going to be in Telford in a month or so, and it's known as the forever chemicals, and it won't go away. It is the big hot topic within the water industry. So Environment Agency are under pressure in terms of monitoring, seeing where these where the sources are, pathways, what the concentrations are in rivers, etc., in our surface waters. And then I suppose the real key then is that what is that long-term effect? So it might be in the water and we can detect it, but is there some kind of long-term impact on human health of the environment? And these are still some of the unknowns. So we're still not sure what that long-term impact of all these PFAS chemicals are, or what impact these chemicals are going to have on the environment and then subsequently on human health. So that kind of kicks off the morning session. And just to say, so that we also have a co-chair for that session, which is Juliet Love, and she's from UCAS. So that's the United Kingdom Accreditation Service. So she's been working there for 9 years, and she's going to co-chair this session, because obviously on the analytical side, people are then keen to say, well, do we have accredited facilities when we analyze for PFAS? Are we analyzing it correctly? Do we have standard procedures and that kind of thing? So that's why Juliet is going to be co-chairing that first session, which is we've got these 3 talks on PFAS.
And then I see that obviously other micropollutants are going to be addressed, and so that the following sessions are going to be looking at sampling methods. Is that right?
Yeah, so the next one we're looking at is micropollutants, or you might call them contaminants of emerging concern. So these tend to be more sort of pharmaceuticals, personal care products, polar pesticides. So these are things that we can't, which are a little bit more complicated to monitor for, the same as PFAS. So in the later sections of the meeting, we start to talk about real-time monitoring and water quality monitoring, but some of the things that we can't monitor for at the moment, in terms of we don't have a sonde or a sensor or anything for them, is PFAS, but also some of these micropollutants. So for polar pesticides, pharmaceuticals, antibiotics, etc. So some of this work is work that I've been involved in as well. So the three speakers are all going to be talking about this idea of monitoring using these things called passive samplers. So this is where the contaminants are sequestered onto some kind of receiving phase over time. And then we take that back to the lab, extract it, and then analyze it either using a gas chromatography or liquid chromatography technique. So we can then start to screen what's in the water. So rather than just having I suppose like a water framework directive targeted list, we can then start to look at a suspect screening or this non-target screening. So we just get a full chemical profile of everything that's there in the water, obviously, that we can either analyze or is sequestered onto whatever receiving phase that we're using. So we've got one speaker from the Natural Resources Wales, who now works we're seconded to the Welsh Government. They're going to be talking about some work that they've done in a number of rivers in Wales, so using a couple of different types of passive samplers. Then we've got a project I was involved in, which is taking the passive sampler, but trying to do it on a micro scale, so a miniaturized passive sampling. This was done using 3D printing as well. So that's kind of a nice take on that. And then the other one is going from surface water, but then looking at drinking water. So there's some work that we did with Southern Water, where we were looking at pesticides and their removal as it flows through a drinking water plant. So again, screening, but seeing what kind of pesticides are there, and then how many are taken out, and it starts to, luckily, it starts to decrease as it goes through that drinking water supply.
Cool. And then every time, well, I don't think I've ever known a time when water quality has been in the media so much as it has been just recently. And that relates more to what you might call time-dependent events, i.e. sewage overflows, which I believe you're addressing in the afternoons of the sessions of the first day.
Yes, so there's one more talk on passive samplers, and then we've got a number of talks which are talking about, I suppose, real-time monitoring or continuous monitoring, but also linked to this idea of the sewage contamination monitoring. So, as you said, all the things that we've seen on the TV and in the press in terms of these CSOs, sewage inputs, but how can we actually, how can we do that continual monitoring so that we've got some continuous data for our rivers, where we can see these CSOs and the impacts that they're having. So we've got one where which is Meteor Communications, who been working with the Environment Agency. So that'll be very interesting to see in terms of that continual water quality monitoring and how that actually works and how they're linking that in terms of working with the Environment Agency. And then another couple of talks. So looking at that, how do we monitor the sewer overflow and sewage contamination monitoring? So those should be some very interesting, but also very topical talks as well, in terms of the light of some of the other speakers that we have on the following day in different sessions, and all of the, I suppose, all of the media that we've seen in terms of things on the TV, on the radio. I mean, we've had, I think there's been quite a large coverage. We've had people from University of Portsmouth on the TV talking about all our CSO inputs into Langston Harbour and various locations, particularly along the south coast.
And of course, the Environment Act 2021 will include, or is including, new requirements for monitoring of CSOs. So I guess the speakers will be covering what the implications of those new requirements will be. And then I see that you're moving on to, I guess, what looks like more laboratory-based analysis of different pollutants. Do you want to tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah, so later on in the day, there's some analytical work. So looking at some in terms of analysis of cyanide. So this is very more kind of laboratory analytical based. So that's on the chemical side, and then also some on the cyanobacteria blooms side. So again, a bit more on the monitoring, but how can we look at algal and toxic blooms? And then again, in terms of some of that catching the contamination, and you just mentioned, Graham, in terms of that 2021 Environment Act. And so how can we, again, bringing that all the way back to, so probably one of the main focuses for this year's water quality is thinking in terms of, well, how do we go about doing our water quality monitoring in line with what's been announced in that 2021 Environment Act, and how people can start to work with that, both people that are doing the monitoring, looking at the data, regulators. And so that kind of rounds up the afternoon on that first day. So that'll be on the 12th of October on the first day. So we've got PFAS, micropollutants, and then water quality monitoring.
Okay. So
with a big emphasis on that Environment Act as well.
Sure. That's quite a packed day for the first day, and I believe that it carries on on the second day.
Yeah, we've got a few talks lined up for the second day. So these ones are really looking a bit more in terms of data analysis, different types of sensors, covering a range of different determinants. So looking at some data analysis and machine learning, also in terms of looking at pH. We've got some where we're looking at dissolved organic matter, so different types of fluorescence spectroscopy. We've also then looking at in terms of flow meters, and then some more optimized or process work in terms of sewage treatment process work. So covering quite a large range of topics on that second day in the morning.
And it's probably, well, I should say that the abstracts for most of these presentations are now available online on the ilemexhibitions.com website. And just as you and I were chatting before this interview, where you were saying there's a presentation in one of the other rooms that you'd like to go to, and I'd like to make that point to all those people that are coming to WWEM. There is an awful lot going on, and so it's very important to have a look at the website and pick and choose the presentations that you want to attend, because if you manage, you'll need to manage your time carefully if you're to make the most of this event. And so I would register as soon as possible. It takes just a few seconds to do. I've done it myself. And then that will give you free access, but it gives you free parking in Telford. free refreshments, free lunch, and free access to all of the presentations in the exhibition. So that's all wonderful, as long as you plan your time carefully in advance. The other thing is that there's a co-located event, AQE, which is air quality and emissions. So for all those people who, especially on the industrial side, who are responsible for their organization's environmental performance, they may well be interested in the regulations, the standards, the monitoring technologies and techniques that apply to the monitoring and measurement of emissions to air. So it's quite useful to be able to dip in and out of both events. So it sounds like a great event. Gary, it's going to be lovely to see you again physically and meet everybody.
It'll be good, yes. So I don't think we haven't had a face-to-face one for a couple of years. So
no, that's right. So thank you so much for your time today, and I look forward to seeing you in Telford.
Yeah, I'll see you soon. Only a few weeks away.
Indeed. Thanks, Gary.
Thanks, Graham.